Hello, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time visiting Heart to Heart. This is an amazing platform where our organization, Less Leg, More Heart, a charity that helps amputees, brings health and wellness experts to you in the comfort of your own homes to educate you about things that are important to overall vitality and wellness and longevity, amputee-related things, general-related things, mental health-related things, anything that we can do to make this life of yours easier to live and more healthy to do so along the way. So Heart to Heart is this platform. It's a 1-hour Zoom virtual support group meeting for amputees around the country, or really anywhere as long as they're English speaking, and it's free. So spread the word, get other amputees on board. And if for some reason they happen to miss it, we do record all of these and we'll be posting them on our YouTube and our social media from time to time. But live is the best because you get access to these amazing brains and wellness experts that you can ask questions, tell personal stories, get feedback, and otherwise these things can be very expensive and actually really hard to get these folks together. So really excited. We have an amazing guest today. I go way, way, way back with our speaker today. Mike Malloy is a dear friend and someone that I've been learning from all along my journey. I started out in CrossFit, and we're talking about kind of before it was cool in like the 2010 era. And he was leading seminars about nutrition and sort of debunking popular opinion and conventional wisdom about nutrition. And coming from an exercise science background and nutrition minor, I thought that I knew things, but it had never worked for me, but I thought that I knew things. And I relearned a lot of things and was able to meet goals in my life and feel healthier and feel more well because of some of his education and guidance. He is now the founder of M2 Performance Nutrition, which has taken off. It's very pronounced in the athletic community and now just the community at large. He does lifestyle adjustments and nutrition that maximizes health and longevity and human performance. And he had said throughout his career, even though he studied cellular biology and biochemistry and immunology and nutrition, and he's worked with more than 40 really high level CrossFit Games athletes and Olympians and NFL players, his most rewarding experiences have actually been from helping the everyday person learn to heal. And that is a really cool mission. And Mike, I'm really excited to bring you to the group and to have them learn from you about a topic that you are like a wizard in and that people are really undereducated about in terms of how important it is, the microbiome, the gut health. So Mike, I'll stop yapping. Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for that incredible introduction. I'll pull up some slides here. And yeah, it's crazy to think how far we go back to the small gyms in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and how much has happened to both of us since then. You know, kids, career changes, all kinds of crazy stuff. So thank you so much for having me.
It turns out that I was the only one that lost a leg, though, and I feel like that's unfair.
Yeah, that's not the weight loss that I'm looking for with clients when that's their goals. Is you know, usually a more a mainstream approach, but anyways, that's a little bit even unconventional for me. All right, so let me pull up these slides here. Can you guys see that? Let's see if I can put it in the presentation mode, and hopefully, could that still present to you guys in the way that I'm hoping it will? Perfect. All right, great. So Tina came and asked me to talk to you guys about the gut microbiome, and it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So a little bit about me. You know, I grew up in New England, and I went to school in a small college in Maine. From there, I went to work at the Children's Hospital in Boston, associated with Harvard, to study muscle biology and stem cell biology and everything else. But all along the way, I knew that I wanted to go back to school to get my PhD, and I knew that I wanted to get it in immunology, essentially. And so I ended up at Dartmouth Medical School up in New Hampshire, and I was there for just under 5 years, sort of just learning about the immune system and how it functions. I did some work on antiviral responses, which I never thought I'd use again, and then COVID happened. So that was an odd return to my days as a viral immunologist for a little bit there. But really, this foray into the gut started when I graduated, and I went down to the National Institute of Health, which is located in Bethesda, Maryland. And I did my postdoctoral fellowship down there in gastrointestinal or gut immunology, really sort of studying what happens to the GI tract and the immune system when it encounters inflammation. How does it regain control? How does it get itself back to a place of health? Along the way, you know, I discovered this crazy thing called CrossFit, which is, of course, how I know Tina. And I started doing, nutrition seminars, not really thinking much of it, just kind of wanting to help some people local to our community. And sort of by accident, kind of exploded into something that eventually became a full company, which is called M2 Performance Nutrition. And, reading that title, you might think we exclusively work with athletes, but I like to tell people that performance really focuses on any aspect of life, performing, at work, as a mom, as a dad, in any way that you can possibly think about it. There's a way to fuel that performance and to live a larger life, as opposed to using nutrition simply to become a smaller version of yourself. And that's really what we are about at M2 Performance Nutrition. So tonight, excuse me, I'm going to talk to you guys all about the gut. And I just want to give you, before we dive into the microbiome, which is such a fascinating subject, I need to tell you where this whole play, this performance is going to occur. And that really is the gastrointestinal digestive tract. So when we think about the digestive tract, a lot of times just people focus on the small intestine and the large intestine, but realistically, it starts all the way up here at your mouth and ends all the way down here at your anus. And everything that exists in here has some relationship with bacteria. And different sites have different densities and different concentrations and different roles in health and wellness. Taking a little bit of a closer look, this is the inside of your gastrointestinal tract. This is the canal. And really the way that I think about the gut is that even though this feels very much like it is inside the body, if you really think about it for a second, there's a hole or a tube that runs all the way through you and is in many ways actually outside of the body. There is a consistent barrier all the way through this tract. And so even though, when you swallow, you think of food coming inside your body, I think of this passageway as actually being sort of like outside the body in many ways. Now, how do we get food and how do we get things from from outside of this inside of us? Well, this tube is actually an extensive layer of folding upon folding upon folding. So you can see here, there's little ridges that occur through the small intestine. And if you were to zoom in on just this little itty bitty piece here, you would see that there's actually more folds on top of those called villi. And then if you were to zoom in even closer on those, you would see that there's additional structures called microvilli. And all of this is for the purpose of creating as much surface area as possible so that you can absorb as many nutrients from your diet as possible. The purpose, of course, of digestion and absorption is to bring nutrients inside the body. And so the way that I think about it is you've got a series of Lego blocks here, and the digestive steps occur to take that, a very specific pattern of Lego blocks and to break it down into individual pieces. And once they're finally in these individual pieces, they can then be transported across this barrier and then reorganized in a different form to create new proteins and new structures. So this food protein has been reorganized into a human protein. Now, that's all well and good. Where does the microbiome come in play? What is it and what does it do? So at a simple definition level, the microbiome is the genetic material of all the microbes, bacterial, fungal, protozoan, and viruses that live on and inside the human body. Essentially, I like to think of the human body as a meta-organism. You can think of yourself as one being, but it's not just human cells that make up you. There are, hundreds of billions of bacteria inside our body. In fact, 10 times as many bacterial cells as human cells. So if you were to think about it from a sheer ratio perspective, 10 times as many bacterial cells inside or on your body as there are human cells. And if you think about genetics, so how many genes do those things express? It's actually a crazier ratio. It's 99 genes from bacteria for every one human gene. And that's a little bit crazy and it's a little hard to think about at first, but it's actually rather exciting because our genetics are relatively fixed. It's not easy for us to go and change our genes and things of that nature if we have the disease. But these microorganisms that live in and on our body are very much so malleable. And so they can be changed in a way that hopefully, over the next 5, 10, or 20 years allows us to make improvements in human health. Now, over the last, I would say 15 years or so, we've developed an extremely profound knowledge that the microbiome and the gut bacteria specifically are major drivers of health and disease. And what we've also learned is that there's very much a lifestyle component to this phenomenon. So if you were to analyze the microbiome, and you can do this, basically, it sounds a little gross, but you take fecal samples from people and you run them through these things called genetic sequencers, and you can identify like the composition of that bacteria. And what we know is that people that live in Western cultures with, antibiotics and sterilization and things of that nature have profoundly different microbiomes from people that live in non-modern, non-Western worlds. And like I say here, these industrialized diets, specifically the foods that we eat, the composition of them, the things that we use to make them hyper palatable or live on shelves for 5, 10, or 20 years, seem to have negative impacts through things like reduction in fiber intake. And if we compare them to hunter-gatherer societies, which is how we evolved for thousands of years, it seems as though our gut biology has really not quite caught up. And last but not least, these modern, truly modern inventions, things like dietary emulsifiers, which we use in ice creams and smoothies and things like that, or artificial sweeteners that we use to reduce calories but make things very sweet. These have actually been shown to disrupt either the gut mucosal barrier, leading to enhanced what we call leaky gut or inflammation. And this can also drive changes in the microbial composition. So all this sounds well and good. Like, does it actually make a difference? Does it actually impact human disease? Well, this list here, which is probably a little bit, oh dear, there we go. This list here, which is basically a system of diseases on the left, is every disease at the point as of 3 years ago that had been linked in some way or another to changes in the microbiome. So there's, relatively minor things like acne, to very, very serious diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, depression, cardiovascular disease, and even cancer. So we've gained a true appreciation of just how important the gut microbiome is in the development and sort of trigger of so many of these, common diseases that people are really living with in the modern world. We have to be careful, though, to not just say that two things are correlated with one another. We really want to try to show that things are actually causative, that one thing is causing another. And so this is just a couple of silly examples here. I'll start at the bottom of, the age of Miss America winner by comparison to murders by steam. And so you can see that these things tracked incredibly closely over about 10 years. And so we can assume that if we want to, have less people die to steam, hot vapors, et cetera, that we should make sure that Miss America always is very, very young. How about letters and winning words of Script National Spelling Bee versus number of people killed by venomous spiders? Again, tracks extremely closely here. So if we're trying to reduce the number of deaths by spiders, we might want to have smaller and smaller words in our spelling bee. So hopefully you can get the facetious.
That's great, Mike.
Yeah. We want to be really careful to not just say that two things are correlative to one another, but ultimately that they are, one perhaps causes one another. And with the gut, we can actually test this in some really, really cool ways. So there's these fascinating animals that we've created called germ-free mice. So, every, mammal on the planet has a microbiome, but we can raise mice in really cool ways such that they don't have one. They have no microbiome, no bacteria, literally none in these animals. They live in little bubbles. And then we can transplant the microbiome from either, healthy control individuals or from people with various diseases into these mice and see if these mice recapitulate the disease. And this has actually now been successfully done for multiple diseases, including obesity, malnutrition, insulin resistance, which is essentially type 2 diabetes, depression, and even silly things like jet lag. And the list just goes on and on and on. So again, you transfer the microbiome into mice that are genetically identical, and the ones that receive the bacteria from people that are suffering from these diseases, the mice get that disease. And it just goes to show you how powerful this is. And I want to give you two examples that really drive this point home. So this is one of the most incredible stories in sort of I think goes to show why it's so important for people to study the gut. So in Malawi, they have, of course, a very large malnutrition issue. But what's interesting is that there's some other component that goes into it besides simply the nutrition unto itself. And at a population level, when twins are born, about roughly half, so just a little bit less than half, one of the twins will become extremely malnourished while the other one stays well nourished. And then, aid groups come in, they try to feed these kids. And despite their attempts to, really give them high calorie diets to improve their nutrition, these children struggle to do better. And despite the fact that ultimately, remember end of the day, they have exactly the same genetics. They are twins with another human being who is not experiencing this disease. And so what the researchers did is they isolated the microbiome from these twins and they transferred them into these germ-free mice. And sure enough, the mice that received the microbiome from a twin that's suffering from this malnourishment disease called kwashiorkor, the mice start to lose weight extremely rapidly. Literally within 3 weeks, they reach a point where they're very close to death. Meanwhile, if you transfer the microbiome from the healthy twin, no weight loss occurs. And what's fascinating is that at this point, when the mice were very, very sick, they gave them a very specific antibiotic to try to knock out a couple of species of bacteria, and they put them on a high calorie diet. And sure enough, the mice regained weight and lived. Well, they gave the exact same antibiotics to these children suffering from the kwashiorkor, this malnourishment disease, and the children responded extremely favorably to them. And so it's an extremely powerful example of taking this disease that we see in humans, transferring it to mice, using it as an experimental model to test how to treat humans, and then going and treating people and literally saving their lives. So the microbiome is powerful. Now, another example that's, I think, a little bit more fun, a little bit less perhaps depressing, is using pregnancy. So if you were to ask people, why do women gain weight when they're pregnant? They would say, oh, it's hormones and the baby, is growing and things like that. And of course, that's right. That's still true. But the microbiome seems to be at play. So they took women after they were, became pregnant, and they isolated their microbiomes from their first trimester or their third trimester. And what they noticed first off is that they were different. Women had a different microbiome during this third trimester phase. They had more what we call pro-inflammatory bacteria here that we can associate with, the inflammation is associated with like insulin resistance, which would be sort of like a low, like a decrease in the ability to get glucose or sugars inside of our muscle and our cells. They then transferred those to germ-free mice, and the mice that received the microbiome from the first trimester mom, basically nothing happened. They didn't really gain any weight. They didn't change in any meaningful way. However, the mice that received the microbiome from the third trimester, bacteria started to gain weight in a relatively quick, rapid, and dramatic fashion. And they experienced insulin desensitization. They started to become very mildly insulin resistant. So basically, at least some component of the weight gain that's driven through pregnancy is caused by the microbiome. So simply just trying to illustrate the power of these, bugs that live on and inside of us, and that we really shouldn't be ignoring them, especially when it comes to things like obesity, etc. So what's causing all of these diseases? This is the same list as earlier. Like, what is actually driving these diseases, and what can we do about it? Like, what can you guys go home and say, aha, I don't want those things to happen to me. How can I make changes? So I need to tell you a story about something called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis, at the end of the day, is simply an imbalance in the microbiome, an outgrowth of some bacterial species or multiple species that is negative or deleterious for the host. So think of it like this. We have a set microbiome that, yes, it changes from, day to day, month to month, year to year, but at the end of the day, it's very, relatively stable. Dysbiosis is when something goes wrong and one or two bacteria dramatically outgrow in a way that they hadn't before. And these cause problems. So it can be driven by diet, exposure to antibiotics, as many of you guys undoubtedly have been through the procedures that you've undergone, exposure to various chemicals, there is some level of genetic impact, and last but not least, infection. So different imbalances have been associated with multiple inflammatory diseases. So dysbiosis is heavily associated with enhanced inflammation. And determining what is a cause and what is an effect is difficult, but several mechanisms can be at play. I just want to walk you through one of them, which is called leaky gut. So this is a extremely close example or visual of what I was showing you earlier, which is this intestinal epithelial barrier. And so on this side is where the bacteria live. And this would be sort of what we call the lumen of your gut, where the food passes through. And on this side would be inside your body. And there's a massive amount of immune cells that live just on the other side of this epithelial barrier. And in a nice, healthy gut with what we call symbiosis, no inflammation, everything is, where it should be. The phrase that I like to say is, ultimately, your feces, your poop, is predominantly made up of bacteria. And so I like to say the role of this intestinal epithelial barrier is to keep your poo separate from you, right? This is you, this is your poo. Let's keep those two things on either side of this barrier. With leaky gut, what happens is that these tight junctions that allow these cells to stay nice and locked in next to one another start to break down due to the outgrowth of these pathogenic invasive bacteria. And now those bacteria, but also the normal healthy ones that sit on this side of the gut, they can either start to translocate through inside to the human body, or some breakdown product, often one that we talk about down here is called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. It's an extremely pro-inflammatory molecule that's very easy to measure. And so we can find elevated levels of LPS as well as elevated amounts of bacteria in these people that are suffering from leaky gut. Leaky gut has been associated with all kinds of diseases, many of which I showed you guys earlier here back on this slide. And so it is something that we want to try to solve, and I'll kind of walk you through that in a second. So here's a couple of examples of those diseases. One is the microbiome is very tightly associated with obesity. So early evidence of a leak was shown through a couple of different papers. The first is that mice that don't have any bacteria at all, they don't accumulate body fat in a meaningful way. And if you test the microbiome with people that are relatively lean, comparative to those who are suffering from obesity, which I truly do believe to be a disease, both in mouse and in humans, they have extremely different microbiomes. Here you can see that it doesn't really matter essentially, but this large difference here exists. You can look and you can say, aha, there's a difference in humans as well, and a lot of it has to do with this Western diet that we're putting ourselves on. Interestingly, like I was talking about earlier, you can transfer this obesity to genetically identical mice. So once again, they turned to twins, and they took twins where one was relatively lean and one had become obese over the years. They isolated the microbiome and they transferred that microbiome into genetically identical germ-free mice. And the mice that received the microbiome from the relatively lean, non-obese twin did not gain meaningful amounts of weight. However, the mouse that received the microbiome from the obese twin gained huge amounts of body fat. Okay, so obesity in this situation is a transferable disease driven by the microbiome. I'm not trying to indicate that that genetics or lifestyle is not important. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to hopefully expand your guys' horizons to say that the gut and gut health is absolutely involved. All right, next topic, the microbiome in the brain. So you might be interested to know that there are huge amounts of nervous tissue or neurons that live in your gut. In fact, some people have told me, and I believe them, that there are more neurons living in your gut than there are in the brain, the central nervous system of a cat. So when we talk about, trust your gut instinct or the, listen to your gut, that's, perhaps a not so, scientifically backed statement when you think about how much of a nervous system is down there. It's called the enteric nervous system, and it really controls everything from digestion to swallowing, the release of enzymes that we use to break down our food, blood flow, and the elimination of digestive waste. For years, doctors assumed that anxiety and depression contributed to things like diarrhea, bloating, upset stomach. And this is, of course, still true, but we also now know that this is a bidirectional pathway that involves the microbiome. So the things that are going on in your brain are relayed through this enteric nervous system down to your gastrointestinal tract, and many times can cause these types of things, diarrhea, bloating, upset stomach, etc. However, we also now recognize that the things that are going on in your gut, specifically inflammatory responses, have the ability to travel back up through the enteric nervous system to the central nervous system and perhaps impact our mood and our actions. So why is this so important? The lifetime prevalence of major depressive disorder is more than 10% now. Lifetime anxiety disorder is approaching 30%. And the World Health Organization predicted that by 2020, only heart disease will outrank depression for global disease burden, meaning we're spending a lot of money treating people with, depression. And ultimately, there's a number of different mechanisms here, which I'm just going to show you quickly. I'm not going to walk through them in any depth or detail because it's a little bit advanced for this talk, but basically the connection is sort of driven here by this image. The gut is intimately connected with both the immune system and with the brain. And the brain has the ability to impact the immune system and the gut, and the immune system, both the gut and the brain. So it's sort of this feedback loop that has this sort of really interesting connection. And the way that I like to think about it is, let's just look at this graphic and this image over here for a second. If I asked you guys when you were sick, like let's say you had the flu, tell me how you're feeling. You'd be experiencing fatigue, loss of appetite, social withdrawal. You don't want to be around anybody, right? You just want to lay down and go to sleep, low motivation, and low mood. Well, many of those words, I would argue, also fall under the category of depression, and perhaps you don't feel as sick, at least physically, as you do when you're fighting something like the flu, but there's some level of that going on within your body. There's a huge amount of connection between the gut and the central nervous system, and the ability to influence the functions and actions of the brain occurs through at least 5 major pathways. And we know now that, that it's a modifiable thing. So what we eat matters. There are bacterial products that we can take, literally probiotics that have been shown in clinical studies to help manage depression and things of that nature. So, I don't think that going out and saying, oh, we should just treat the gut as a replacement for something like therapy or, anxiety or depression medication is the answer. But I think that we need to start paying more attention to this component down here and not just solely focus on this component up here. All right, so I've given you guys some examples of how the microbiome is connected to the disease and health. What can we actually do to try to, work it into our favor? The good news is that there's nothing massively time-consuming or that's disparate from our general health recommendations. The lifestyle changes that you would think about generally making for your overall health are going to impact your gut in a beneficial way as well. Diet, exercise, and sleep. Those are the big 3 for pretty much everything. On top of that, there are certain supplements that have been shown to have clinical benefit in modulating the microbiome as well. Those fall underneath the categories of probiotics and prebiotics. So I'll give you guys some details on all of this. All right. So dietary choices are definitely known to impact the microbiome. It's, certainly there's a genetic component, but diet is thought to cause over 50% of the variation in microbial diversity in humans. That basically means that, if we look at every person on the planet, there's a huge amount of diversity, and at least 50% of it is driven by what we eat. By comparison, twin studies where people have identical genetics, it only controls about 8% of your microbiome. So it's really, really leans heavily into this food category. Dietary changes have been shown to alter the microbiome. So if you were to wake up tomorrow and decide to go from a omnivore diet to being completely vegan, and I'm not saying you should, that would change your microbiome in a really, really massive, meaningful way. So let's just walk through some of the most popular diets that people are using these days, and let's just think about from a gut perspective whether or not they're a good idea. So ketogenic diets have been shown to increase the amount of this one bacteria called Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a good thing for managing body weight, as well as another bacteria called lactobacillus, which is very, very popularly used within probiotics. However, those good things are negated by a massive decrease in what we call microbial diversity. Basically, at the end of the day, we know that we want to have as many different bacteria living in our gut as possible. And keto, unfortunately, kind of crushes that. So from a gut perspective, a bad thing. Also decreases these other things called short chain fatty acids, which have been very, very, very much linked to our overall gut health. And sadly, keto makes them drop. So from a gut perspective, not a huge fan of the ketogenic diet. Intermittent fasting is another really popular, dietary approach that people are using these days. Mouse studies indicate that every other day fasting, which to be clear is definitely extreme and not something I have any interest in doing, introduces changes to a microbiome that improve obesity, the development of this stuff called beige fat, which is very metabolically active, a good thing, and reduces inflammation, also a good thing. We can transplant this effect into other mice, indicating that it is a causative effect. So the microbiome is driving these changes. Fasting also improved clearance of salmonella infections. Not going to be upset about that. And then basically it also increases levels of this key protein, which is really responsible for sort of protecting our gut overall from new infections coming in. It's called interglobulin A. Details aren't important, but lots of good things come from intermittent fasting. Now, studies in human are still kind of ongoing or being planned. So, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to check back in with you guys in a couple of years to tell you whether or not these great effects that we're seeing in mice, have transplanted into the human world, so to say. Last but not least, gluten-free diets are very popular amongst people these days. Celiac patients have a unique microbiome that are heavily enriched for these really strongly pro-inflammatory bacteria. Celiac disease is basically when you have a very strong immune response against gluten. And if you put those patients onto a gluten-free diet, this whole thing goes away. A second study indicated that going on a gluten-free diet reduces some of these other really helpful bacteria in people with celiac disease. So, not necessarily a great thing there. But healthy people on gluten-free diets do overall seem to see beneficial changes in their microbiome. So in summary, keto sort of a fail, but intermittent fasting and gluten-free seems to have some benefits both in mice as well as in people. Let's transfer on and move on to another topic here. So the impact of exercise in the microbiome. People that exercise tend to have higher levels of good, healthy bacteria associated with them, such as, like I was saying before, this Akkermansia muciniphila, which is very strongly correlated with people's ability to lose weight, as well as a high overall microbial diversity, another good thing. Active individuals tend to have higher levels of these short chain fatty acids, which are really, really important for gut health. And then the microbiome of active individuals and athletes may produce metabolites that are responsible for tissue repair, increasing our energy intake, and improving carbohydrate utilization, all really good things. Let's just skip this for a second here. I thought this study was really, really fascinating. So they went and they analyzed the top finishers at the Boston Marathon. And they looked at their gut microbiomes and they said, ooh, this one right here, this is very unique. We're not used to seeing this one in other people. And so they isolated it. And it's called Veillonella. They took this bacteria and they transplanted it into mice and they put them on little treadmills. And the mice that received the bacteria from these elite Boston Marathon runners ended up being able to run further, faster, and longer than the mice that didn't get those bacteria.
Did they grow their legs back, Mike?
if only. But I thought it was really cool that even something as crazy as endurance performance has connections to our microbiome. And so there's actually a company out there in Boston that has tried now to isolate this bacteria and turn it into sort of a performance enhancing probiotic, so to speak.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. We're about to be done in about, I'd say, 4 slides here. So sleep really quickly. Shift work is associated with all kinds of nasty diseases here, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, etc. And we know that when you don't sleep appropriately, It causes massive changes in your microbiome. And if you transplant those into mice, those changes are transplantable, indicating that the microbiome is responsible for many of those deleterious consequences from a lack of sleep. So at the end of the day, eat a high quality diet, exercise, and get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night if you possibly can, if you want to have a good, healthy gut. Really quickly, I want to talk about probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics are simply live microorganisms, which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit to the host, which would be us. Most probiotics have really poor clinical evidence. They don't get tested. They're kind of, it's the wild, wild west of the supplement world. However, there are a couple of really good ones out there that I think are worth checking out. At the end of the day, they seem to be helpful for treating things like diarrhea due to antibiotics, have benefits for insulin resistance, and maybe help during the remission stage of inflammatory bowel disease. Long-term benefit is still controversial, but getting better with more high-quality probiotics. Prebiotics is different. So probiotics is sort of like the ultimate grass that is growing. Prebiotics would be the fertilizer that you lay down to grow that healthy grass. Basically, the definition here is selectively fermented ingredients that allow specific changes, basically in the gastrointestinal microbiota that confer benefits upon the host. So basically, the goal here is to use the food sources that bacteria like to grow upon to outgrow really good bacteria and hopefully not outgrow any bad bacteria. There are many preclinical studies with good efficacy for multiple disease indications, but human studies are still kind of just getting started. We don't have a lot of data on these yet. If you are looking to increase your consumption of prebiotic-rich foods, you don't want to go take a prebiotic supplement. Just a list here. The big ones that are probably easier to get down would be oats, more like green bananas as opposed to overly ripe ones, leeks, onions, artichokes, garlic, some other crazier ones over here on the right side. Last but not least, I just want to talk to you guys about one thing that I think is really important to try to remove from your diet. At this point, it's really an important aspect if you're trying to have a healthy gut. So emulsifiers are often used in processed foods to improve ingredient mixing. So think about like an ice cream that is extremely creamy, especially if it was like a coconut milk one or something like that. They are using high concentrations of these emulsifiers, such as lecithin, guar gum, and about 20 other chemicals to make it taste and look and feel that way. And while it's helpful for our food to make it creamier, unfortunately, it also seems to be able to break down or disassociate this mucus layer that lives within our gut that helps separate those bacteria from our host tissue. And so this was shown very powerfully in this study. So if I can just draw your attention down here, you can see this big barrier between this green section, which is essentially the bacteria, and this blue tissue, which is the human host tissue. And we want that barrier to be nice and robust. And when you apply emulsifiers on it, that gets dramatically decreased such that the bacteria are getting closer and closer. And in many cases, it might be hard to see, but you can find these green exposures inside the tissue. The bacteria have actually started to leak, and we have that leaky gut phenomenon, which is shown here as well. So in general, I would recommend avoiding emulsifiers because it has also been associated with increases in weight gain. So this is a mouse study, but they put them on different types of emulsifiers and measure their body weight over time. And you can see that they gain substantially more weight, about 25% more weight. So at the end of the day, definitely something that we want to avoid. So in summary, to generate a nice, healthy microbiome and overall gut, we want to eat a nice high fiber diet continuously, including resistant starch and high fiber foods. We want to exercise. We want to sleep within the appropriate circadian rhythms. We want to try to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. We want to add in a high quality tested probiotic, maybe eat some prebiotic rich foods, and generally avoid dietary emulsifiers. So I went a little over the 30-minute time cap there, but hopefully that was helpful to you guys. And I'm happy to take and answer any questions that you guys might have.
Mike, wow. Every time I see you speak, and I've had the pleasure of doing it at several venues, several different times, you just take us on this like journey. I liken your presentations to like a Whitney Houston song where you
Oh, I don't know. No, I'm not that
get the
far. No,
pre Bobby Brown, even I'll go that far,
Oh God.
up on and then down. I hope that everybody learned a lot. I know that a lot of what Mike says, he has such a profound knowledge that he really tries to dumb it down to non-jargon terms for the common understanding, because this is a very intricate overlaid field of very scientific things. But I can tell you with my full assurance, and to hopefully assure you and anyone else that's viewing online, Mike is a very well researched person and very well regarded in our community, because the things that he says are current and up to date and very much literature based. So you can trust the information that he says. There's so many things that are being said about all the things out there nutrition wise, and it's always hard to figure out what to believe. And really it just comes down to what science has shown us and what studies have been done and what the pros and cons of those studies are. And Mike's really dedicated his work and his social media, which if you haven't checked out, you really should, M2 Nutrition, because he really does a great job of making palatable concepts about these types of facts so that you can understand them. So Mike, thanks so much. Does
Oh, yeah, of
anybody
course.
have like, I know there's a lot there. I have a couple questions, but does anybody else have questions? Yeah, like anybody have
Hopefully at the end of
questions?
the day, you guys just, if nothing else, get the concept that your gut is really important, and if you start thinking about it in any way that you weren't before, then I'll go home happy. I know it's a lot of dense scientific information in there.
I've got a question.
Sure.
I went to a naturopathic doctor, and I was having gut issues, and he gave me probiotics, and we talked about diet and everything. And the second time I went to see him, I said, I haven't seen much change. And he said, well, we can take a stool sample and test it for about $325.
Yeah, it's gonna say not gonna be cheap.
Yeah. Is this something that you're involved with? I mean, it sounds like where you're discussing all that.
The question that I would ask you to ask your naturopathic doctor would be, what are you going to use that information for? There's definitely value in having an understanding of, well, do we see outgrowths in certain bacteria, et cetera? But I would want to have a clear plan from your physician to say, well, what comes next? So let's say we identify that, yeah, I have, a higher microbial burden than we're used to seeing. What are we going to do? Are we going to go and, from a naturopathic doctor, they might use, what would it be? Like there's garlic isolation products and some other stuff that they could try to give you. But, I would be careful to say that you should just go to do it, because it is expensive. And oftentimes the data that comes out of it is hard for anybody who's not extremely well trained in the art to interpret and understand.
He told me that the GI guys, would appreciate that information.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to transfer your care over at some point to a gastroenterologist, they might be happy to know that information. From their perspective, they're probably thinking about whether or not there's a true infection going on there, which you can identify from those tests. So things like salmonella or certain E. coli gastrointestinal infections. If it's a really good one, they can sometimes have viral tests on there as well. But at the end of the day, I think if it was me in that situation, I might want to try some other aspects first. So I might ask him, I don't know what your symptoms are per se, but if I was dealing with bloating and general discomfort, I might ask about something called like a low FODMAP diet, or even just something as simple as going gluten-free and dairy-free for 30 days and seeing how I feel, seeing if I see any changes to my symptoms. Again, simply because I just don't know from a naturopathic perspective what they're going to do with that information. And I would hate for you to spend $350 and to not get anything beneficial from it.
And actually, I'm a lot better than I was.
Yeah.
When I was talking to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting. I go, I wonder. And I looked it up on the internet and everything, but I was just curious. Thanks.
No, of course.
Thanks, Jean. Craig, do you have any questions, or you good?
Yeah, I do. You mentioned, Mike, that diet was 50%. What is exercise and sleep? Would that be like 25 and 25?
Yeah, probably pretty close, right? Between diet, exercise, and sleep, we're probably getting to close to, like, I would guess 95, 99% of the piece of the pie there. It's not necessarily been as well studied by these, in the same way that diet has, but I would guess they're large chunks of the pie and definitely worth putting energy into.
Oh, is there any gut healthy supplements or anything you recommend? Or
Yeah, so obviously the probiotic, let's see, the one that I would recommend, I'll write it down here for you guys in the chat. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Biome. And I guess I could probably just drop a link in there for you guys. Couldn't? That's the benefit of doing this all online.
Nice.
It is, it's a little bit pricier, but I would say this would be something that you would use for like a month, or well, I guess 2 months, because it's 60 capsules. So it's about 50 cents per day, a little bit less than that for a 2-month supply. But Biome is a high quality, actually clinically tested probiotic. I get no kickbacks. I have no association with the company. I make no money off of anything. That would be one. And then if that, if you're just like, hey, there's no way that's going to fit into my budget. The other one that I took for many years, especially when I was a broke grad student making exactly $0. This is another one called Hyperbiotics. And so that one's a little bit less expensive. I think there's let's see, 60. So yeah, that's about 30 cents per day to get to use that one. So those are the two that I would recommend there. The only
what was the first one again?
What's that?
What was the first one again? Sorry.
Yeah, you can see it in the chat. Maybe Tina can send it out to you guys after.
I got on this phone.
Yeah,
I'll send it to you after, Craig.
Yeah.
So it's a
Okay,
linkable
thank you.
thing.
Perfect.
You're welcome.
And then the only other thing I might recommend for everybody, I would say for gut health, would just be a generally good, high quality omega-3 supplement. Omega-3s are generally good for gut health. They're good for anti-inflammatory responses and everything else. I'll send you my favorite one. I'll drop it into the chat here as well. Everyone gets freaked out because it's a liquid and everyone's like, oh, it's going to taste like fish. I'm going to hate it. I'm not kidding. It tastes like lemon frosting. It's amazing. It's the only fish oil I consistently take because it's actually so good I want to take it. So for gut health, those would be the two major things, a probiotic and an omega-3 supplement.
Awesome. Rhoda, do you have any questions? Pretty good. You're on mute, hun.
Unfortunately, you're muted.
Like, could I take those because I'm on like a lot of blood thinners? Would I be able to take it? Okay.
You wouldn't want to take the omega-3 if you're on blood thinners.
Okay.
Simply because there is some blood thinning effects from your omega-3 supplement. And in general, any of these supplements, I'll say you should discuss with your medical professional before taking them, as always, just to make sure he doesn't get in trouble. But the Biome, the probiotics in general, don't have any cross-reactivity with any of the blood thinners, so you should be fine on that perspective. But yeah, omega-3 you want to be careful with.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome.
Great questions, guys.
That was my question too, was just some of the supplements that you recommended. It seems like food is kind of the best way to go in terms of prebiotic. And the only last comment I had before we close out was for people that have medical reasons or social reasons that inhibit their ability truly to get restful sleep or sleep. It's, you always liken like throwing gasoline on a fire for people that are active when they're not recovering. And like, it's a chronic issue for a lot of people, hospitalized people that there's, blood pressure checks every 2 hours and they're waking you up and then everything's beeping. Or
no place worse to get a good night of sleep than a hospital.
Yeah. Or so in those circumstances, are the efforts that you take otherwise futile, or what would be the prioritization of?
Great question. Yeah. So I think, I like to operate in the perspective of good, better, best. So yeah, of course, in the best case scenario, we have a high quality diet, we got exercise, we sleep 7-8 hours a night. That's not life. So if your sleep is not great due to things that are causing, that are out of your ability to control, I think you just have to lean extra into those other aspects. So lean into high quality foods. Obviously exercise is a time and a physical demand, but just learning to find ways just to move more, even doesn't have to be in a gym per se. That in and of itself can be profoundly impactful on so much of what we talked about here. And so, that's where I would put my energy. And at the end of the day, like I said, diet's 50% here, right? That's a big chunk of the pie just by eating high quality, mostly unprocessed foods, which I understand can sometimes be expensive, but you know, you can pay your grocer or you can pay your doctor, as some people like to say. So
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, unless there's any other questions, Mike, I just can't thank you enough. I think this content is just so important, and I look forward to other people seeing it that weren't able to make it tonight.
oh, of course, yeah, no
I
worries.
know that these seeds are sometimes planted for folks that, you know,
Yeah,
it
no,
becomes
I get
watered.
it.
You know, it becomes watered whenever it's appropriate in their lifetime. So peppering this in right now, I think, is awesome. And thanks so much for your time and talent.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate everybody joining,
Thank
and
you.
everyone have a great night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
See you later. Thank you so much.